Welcome to the Manawa Tech podcast. My name is Siobhan. Now, this episode has to be the longest episode so far. I had so much fun diving deep into the technologies that Aaron Fulton has used in his various roles during his technology career. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast. It's really great to have you on. I guess we'll start on by just saying what you're about and sort of who you are and what you're about.
Hi, so thanks for inviting me on the podcast. It's really great to be doing this. It's great that you've taken the initiative to get this thing going for Manawa Tech and to be able to showcase the tech and the people that are doing tech in the Manawa too. So about me, so I have a whole lot of different interests and I've done a whole lot of different things. But I'm predominantly working in the sort of the IT technical space. Got a huge range of interests, anything from, spend a lot of time in the software development space, but I've done sort of anything from sort of hardware to image analysis to CRM systems. And I love anything kind of technical. So, even if I'm, out in the garden doing something, I want to, understand the soil type and what plants grow where and what lighting to get everything in the right place to make it work really well. So, yeah, that's what I do. I'm married, have been for 12, 13 years now. 3 kids.
Congratulations! Wow.
Who I've now kicked out of the meeting room, so they're not going to be screaming over my shoulder anymore.
Nice. Cool. I guess we'll start from the beginning. Like, when did you start? How did you get into technology, and how did you make your start?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in doing tech stuff and IT things, or computer things really, because IT wasn't really a thing back in the day. I was probably about 10 or 11 when I got my first computer. I think I'd go home from school and I'd just tell my parents, computer this, computer this, computer this, computer this, and they decided that they would buy a computer. So the first computer we got was the Amiga 500. It was a great little beginner machine. It was, pretty cool at the time. Amigas were known as the game machines. They had really good graphics compared to what the PCs could do at the time. And I was initially really nervous with this thing. I didn't know how it worked, and I was scared of corrupting it or damaging it in some way. But grew in confidence over time. And the computer came with a couple of things. So the operating system came on a floppy disk, and it also came with a second disk called BASIC. I didn't know what BASIC was. It took me a couple of years until I put it open, opened it up, and I get this blank screen. I'm like, what's this? What do you do with that? When I'd kind of exhausted everything else that I could learn about the rest of the system, because no internet in the day, what you had was by talking to friends, reading magazines, and getting stuff off a mail or a floppy disk. I decided I wanted to understand this BASIC thing a bit more. So I found in the local library they had some books on BASIC, which had programs in them. And so I got some of those books out of the library, and I just started typing in the programs from the book verbatim, and you hit run, and you go, oh, it does something. That's interesting. And kind of just learnt from there, got more books out, copied more things, reverse engineered the programs to work out what each command did, because I didn't have a manual or anything to look at. All I could do was kind of reverse engineer. And kind of worked it out from there, and started to make all sorts of little programs about, I can't remember what I did, but I made heaps of little things.
Nice. That's really cool. I mean, so what was programming like back then? For like us younger people, we probably won't know much about it. Like, what was it like? What were some challenges, like things that we take for granted back then?
Yeah, well, back then it was just normal. Like, I didn't know anyone else who was into programming. There's no one I could talk to, no one I could ask anything. Literally, all I could do was to get a book out of the library and copy the programs and then reverse engineer it to see how it worked. I remember one year asking for a manual, a basic manual for Christmas from my parents, so that I could actually read it and understand all the commands, to know what all the commands were, because there were things that I'd never come across in the books. It's like, oh, that's cool. And then how they worked, rather than just kind of try to reverse engineer the command and put different things in and see what happened. So that's how programming was. And we had floppy disks, the little 3.25 inch floppy disks, or 3.5, I think. And yeah, so you put that in the computer and you go, wait for it to load, which would take about 2 minutes, and then you can start to use it.
That's incredible because now we have Stack Overflow. You can Google pretty much anything. You can imagine you can get a manual and like the code there could be a typo in that manual. And you just spend hours trying to figure it out, and versus
Yep.
now we can just Google things. And
And
I guess
the manual I got was MS Basic, which was the Microsoft version because you couldn't buy an Amiga one, and so there were compatibility differences between the two, but it was close enough. I knew the Amiga could do things like graphics that you couldn't do on the MS-DOS one, but that took a long time to work out because the disk came with 2 sample programs. Couldn't find any books on Amiga Basic specifically, and the MS Basic manual didn't cover that stuff. So,
wow,
I made little games where balls bounce around the screen. Programmed in some songs. You could make it play music. I think
that's cool.
I made a racing car game with ASCII, so you use the / and / characters for your road, and your little asterisk,
okay.
and you use the arrow keys to move the asterisk left and right, and you sort of scroll everything on the screen, and then you print another piece of road, and you 3 going that way, and same to do all the kind of the math to work out where to print the characters and number of spaces and all that sort of stuff.
That's exactly right. I think making these really small games kind of gives you a really good. It's fun. Number one, it's a fun thing to do, and like kind of gives you the idea of like the mathematics behind it. Because ASCII is not like, I guess the hardest part too is like graphics, like be able to produce graphics and art. But then if you just get to ASCII, you get the underlying programming principles. This reminds me of a time because do you remember those Casio graphics calculators? Like it's a green and color. Yeah. So my kind of first foray into programming was actually making a game where like you print like a ship on the screen and it like fires asterisks coming across the screen. And I'm making a game like that with Golang, like similar, just a terminal game, just for a bit of fun. So yeah, it's kind of it's kind of cool that you had that experience. How old were you when you were playing around with the Amiga 500?
I probably started programming when I was probably 12, somewhere around there. I had a friend who was a little bit into that, and so he's kind of we could talk about programming.
And did you know you were learning programming, or did you know that programming could be a career when you were that young?
I think I had a friend, and his dad was a programmer. Yeah, okay. So I think I did. I think I talked to him a little bit about programming. Yeah. But I think I didn't know a lot. He worked on business things, and I didn't understand any of what he was talking about. So.
Yeah, I remember reading this article, this blog post, and the blurb about the author said they were really into computer programming when they were a child, but they didn't realize it was a career, so they ended up doing like another left-hand like job until they realized you can actually make money from programming, and then came back to the career. That's why I had to ask. So in school and high school, did you do much computer-related things like IT or programming in high school, or?
No, we didn't really have any options for that. We had two computer rooms in the whole school, so there was 700 kids at high school. One of those was for the computer class, which was only for the senior students, and the other room was shared amongst the rest of the school.
Yeah.
So it was a whole lot of Apple Mac computers, little square box things with a tiny little screen.
Yeah.
Black and white, slow as a dog. And we got to use those on the odd occasion. I did typing. It was one of the options that we could do, and that was done on an electric typewriter. So you type everything out, and you've got sort of a one-line text screen where your words go, and then once you're happy with it, you push enter, and then it prints onto the screen. It prints onto the paper. Screen clears, and you get to start the next row. If you had made a mistake, you got the twink out, and you wound the paper back, and realigned the
find the exact spot. Wow.
Yep.
We take so much for granted now. I'm just realizing
it makes you learn to touch type properly because mistakes were painful.
No errors. So coming out of high school, what did you study after that? Did you do computer science or some other degree? What did you do?
So I decided to go a little bit left field. I guess I knew computers were kind of a career, but I also heard that food technology was a really good thing to get into, and I was into sciences as well. So I came down to Massey, and I did the food technology course in Palmerston North. It was kind of a toss-up between that and software engineering at Auckland. They were kind of my two options. I didn't really want to have to move to Auckland. And it turns out my grades weren't good enough to get in there anyway. So food technology it was, a bit down to Palmerston North. So food technology is a commercial food production course. So it's out of the engineering department. It's not cooking. There's a little bit of what we call product development in there, which is where you actually put ingredients together, but then you mix that with science. You do a whole lot of, taste tests and other lab tests to work out how to get that food suitable for sale in the supermarket.
So and it's mass scale too, right?
Yeah, food chemistry, food physics, engineering, all the rheology, the fluids flowing through pipes, all the math and stuff that goes around that, heat transfer, all that sort of fun things, but also with a bit of market research and a bit of business stuff thrown in there as well. So
it's a pretty complete degree. Not a lot of computing, or was there a bit of so it was a very engineering heavy degree, I'd imagine, right? So did you do any programming?
So the first year we had a introduction to programming paper that we had to do. So they were teaching C at the time, which is a pretty low-level language, and you kind of have to really know what's going on under the hood to make that work. And so they had those of us who kind of got that way of thinking, and everybody else who really didn't. And so there weren't a lot of middle grades in that paper. It was kind of an A or an F. There wasn't a lot in the middle.
Yeah, it's interesting that what computer science, computing is. It's either people who don't care about it, so they end up not performing well, or people who really love it. So you get that kind of binary distinction. And you are right. C is I haven't really touched C. I think my first programming language was Python officially. So I never understand pointers or memory allocation, that kind of stuff. So very fortunate not to. You can almost get away without even knowing that these days. It feels like
you don't. It's good to have that knowledge when something's not going right or you need performance to be able to go down there. If you're working in the embedded space with microcontrollers, performance matters, and so you can't run anything heavy like Python on there. Python is an interpreted language; it's just too slow. So you have to write in C or something like that can compile down to native code.
Absolutely. And you need that control as well, that fine-grained control in terms of memory. So after university, what did you do beyond, did you have any projects? So a lot of people I've talked to have had projects in university that kind of set them up for jobs. Was that the situation you had, or what did you do post-university?
No, I didn't really do any separate projects. The study was pretty full-time. It was 60 plus hours a week of work plus assignments. But I was quite involved in the club scene there, and I decided, rightly or wrongly, when I finished my degree, that I wanted to kind of give back a little bit, and I put my name down to be nominated for running for the Students' Association. So I was elected into there. So I was the vice president at the Students' Association for I was there for 2 years. I had to get elected in twice. And the Students' Association is actually quite a big organisation. It's much smaller now, but back then I think it had about a $2 million turnover, so it owned about 40 houses. It had a radio station, a newspaper, a shop, an events division, and probably some other
MUSA, right? MUSA is the acronym. MUSA is the acronym,
MUSA,
right?
the Massey University Students Association.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I did that for a couple of years. So my role was kind of more behind the scenes, just making sure that everything was running. And then I kind of did that for a couple of years, and I think they would have liked me to run for a third year. I'm like, no, 2 years is enough. So I engineered myself out of that one. So in order to run, you have to be studying. So I made sure I didn't do any papers during the election time, so that I didn't qualify.
Okay. So what was it like being a VP? Was it just a lot of, I guess, leadership or delegation kind of tasks? What did being a VP teach you, or vice president teach you that you take today?
So we actually had 3 vice presidents. So I was in charge of kind of administration stuff. We had somebody who was in charge of welfare. So when students would have issues with their course or their lecturers or even personally or whatever, we could come in and help sort that out. We actually had an advocacy division as well, where we actually paid a person to be the advocate for a student and work through some of those difficult problems.
Wow.
We also had an education portfolio as well, and so they represented the students at like academic board, and the president sits on council, so at the top level of the university. So we had quite a lot of
stake.
Touch lots of different parts of the university. So my job was more just to kind of make sure that all of that kind of kept running and ticking over. So I would attend all like the managers' meetings and things.
Great. So you kind of deal with
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So you get to deal with people. Like, did it teach you a lot about what you do today?
Yeah, I certainly look back on those times and then the people I worked with. Of course, we were all students, so we had no real life experience, and so we were all pretty green, and we made lots of mistakes. And of course, they had a different set of executive every year, and so the staff put up with a whole lot of different, executive, in theory, running the place, come in green every year, having to kind of take a year to get up to speed, and then move on from there. But yeah, I met all sorts of cool people, went to lots of conferences and things. I can, look at politicians now, like, oh, I know you, and I know you, and I know you, or at least I've met you once,
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool, Aaron. Like, and that's sort of that's something a bit different, I guess, because you expect people just to work. After the student association, where did life take you after that?
Yeah, so I was tossing up, what do I do next? Do I go sort of the food technology route, or do I kind of go with my passion and do the IT stuff? And so I started applying for a whole lot of different jobs all over the country, in both fields, kind of seeing what would stick. Lots of the food jobs were kind of Auckland, kind of South Auckland. There's a big food production area up there, and I really wasn't that keen on moving to Auckland. But when I come to university, I decided that I was going to be this person, come in, do my degree, and then get out and find a job somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I did a 4-year degree and then 2 years at the Students' Association. And the job I ended up getting was in the IT space for the New Zealand, became the New Zealand Veterinary Association, but it was called VetLearn at the time, and it was actually based on campus. So I moved from the Students' Association to the Vet Tower, which is a whole, 200 metres away.
New scenery.
And I'm honest to North now, so 20-something years later.
Cool. So you're still the same. You obviously moved on. Like, how long were you at that stint?
I think it was about 4 or 5 years. It was originally VetLearn, where we did continuing education. So we were starting to merge with the Vet Association, and so I was originally brought in to kind of backfill one of the other people who was helping to put in a shared CRM system between the two organisations. Soon discovered that we had to do a whole lot of SQL writing and report writing, and I was actually better at that than he was. So I ended up doing a lot of that work, and he ended up doing his original job.
Great. So what sort of technologies did you use at the Vet Association?
Yeah, so the CRM system we were putting in was one called IMIS, which is a not-for-profit system. It's not really used by that many people in this part of the world. It's sort of a North American product. So that's what we're putting in, which in theory did all the things that a not-for-profit CRM would need. Event registrations, memberships, product sales, and then, keeping track of, customer interactions and all that sort of stuff. Or our accounting system ran out of that as well. So that's what I was doing with that. But at the same time, we also had a journal database called SciQuest, which needed to be completely updated. And so that was one of my projects, was to rewrite this journal article database. I think it had about 40,000 articles about veterinary science in it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that I sort of rebuilt and looked after. And we also had an e-learning platform, so we were using Moodle.
I remember Moodle, because
very early adopters on Moodle. So Massey adopted that probably about 6 or so years after we were using it. So we were there right from the beginning. So working through that and having to teach veterinarians how to make online courses and that sort of stuff, which was all fun and interesting. Nice. So I got to learn SQL, T-SQL, Microsoft SQL, really well, because all the reporting needed to be done in SQL or using a tool called Crystal Reports, which is kind of a visual drag and drop editor. But the first thing you have to do is to connect all your tables up and put all your joins So you really had to understand the data and how all that worked. And one of the things we had to build in there, which in hindsight was probably a dumb idea, and I probably should have said, no, this won't work. But I was too green at the time to know that it shouldn't have been possible, was to actually write an insurance system inside T-SQL, which it worked better than what they had, but it was still a pretty fragile beast. And so they used that for running an insurance scheme for veterinarian practices. So I got to do all sorts of fun and interesting things there. Did some work for a couple of organisations, veterinary organisations in Australia as well. So got to travel over there and work with a few different people. So yeah, that was all fun for quite a few years.
Nice. What was that? What was the? Because you're learning basically the veterinarian domain space. Like you probably know it pretty well. Would you say?
No, veterinary science is another whole thing. I remember when I first started there, we had a guy who's one of the top veterinarians in the country running some courses, and I had to get his material, which he'd send via emails or whatever, and kind of format that up into nice PDFs, and then proofread it. And I was literally understanding 1 and 3 words. I'm like, I can't read this. Like, I literally have no idea what you're saying.
Wow, that's incredible.
Running conferences and things, I'd sit there and move the slides on, and I remember doing one. It was about horse insemination. I'm like, I don't really want to know about this, but
nice. In terms of because you said T-SQL wasn't you were doing something and it didn't like the insurance system using T-SQL wasn't a good idea. How'd you know that? Like how'd you know that at the time? Or
I
what made you think about that?
Which is why I built it. It's basically running SQL queries. So copying things from this very rudimentary interface that we had, which was basically like a spreadsheet where you can just put lines of stuff in. Taking that and then doing manipulations on it, running up through the account system and whatever, putting data somewhere else. And so I had all of these stored procedures that I would just run continually over the data to make it do all the right things, and then running crystal reports to then report on that at the end and total things up so that the managers could manage. So the very basic user interface, not a lot of data validation, a very fragile system because when I don't know if you've worked much with SQL, but it's very hard to deal with a record. You kind of have to deal with the data set at once.
Yeah.
So needing to pick up like all of the transactions and then only treat the ones that have come in today separately. And so we ended up having to use things called cursors, which are actually basically like a for loop, looping over all the records and things, which lots of the SQL systems might support now, but they were part of T-SQL and things that you would normally just do with an application.
Wow, that's incredible. I think a lot of taking things for granted. Our theme back in earlier in the podcast, we talked about the theme of what we take for granted, because like now we have a lot of ORMs, of the relational mappers to make basically abstracting writing SQL away. Fortunately, for my work, like these last 2 weeks, we've been writing like raw SQL, trying to get away from ORMs to just having views that we just call and query directly. So it's interesting to and like Postgres, we're using Postgres at work. It's really, really cool, like the things you can do. So yeah, it's interesting.
I still haven't come around to liking ORMs. I still like to go back to the raw SQL. Every ORM I've used is heavy, and then just instead of having to write SQL, you now have to learn how to write ORM, and then when that doesn't work, convert that to SQL and learn that anyway. So
okay, this is my maybe a bad take, but I think ORMs are there. If you don't know how to write SQL, then you would reach out for an ORM and then use the ORM. I think that's kind of like a band-aid, I think. But if you can write pure SQL, then you just write pure SQL. But a lot of like people like me who are kind of new devs or kind of people who haven't formally studied computer science, we just grab the ORM and use that. I think that's a popularity. I could be wrong. What about migrations though? Like how would you deal with migrations in T-SQL? Was that a problem or an issue?
So the CRM system we used, we didn't upgrade.
Okay, so you just said like a...
Yeah, so they had a new version, but in that new version, it was basically a complete rewrite. We heard all these horror stories of organizations, not-for-profit organizations having to spend $200,000 or $300,000 on the migration.
Wow.
And then they changed the license model, which made it twice as expensive for the organisation to run. So at that point, we decided, no, we're staying put.
Incredible. Okay.
So yeah, I never really had to deal with a migration.
Okay.
Probably a bad problem to have, but
Wow. After the vet association, what did you do after the vet association?
so towards my end of the time there, I wanted to have a bit of a change. So I was working 4 days a week for them, and I was starting to try to do my own thing, but of consulting 1 day a week. Really didn't know what I was doing, but I started doing that.
Yeah.
Basically, the first project I got was for a friend's company. They had a project to develop some particular sensors that had to talk to the cloud, and they were doing the electronic side, and they didn't know much about the cloud stuff. So they said, "Hey, do you want to subcontract to us and do that part of the project?" I went, "Yeah, sure, sounds good." So I basically got this brief, which was, "Here's the data. Can you do the cloud bit?" That was my entire brief.
Okay.
So trucked away at that. I was using a system called Drupal at the time, which is a content management system / framework. You can kind of use it both ways, and so I started using some of the sort of drag and drop tools to quickly build interfaces and getting some dashboards and things up, which worked pretty well. And then that project sort of grew, and it became a company called Levno.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So then Levno hired me, and so I became employee number one at Levno, building
Nice.
from nothing. So I think we had 15 sensors to start with, which were the 15 prototypes that were all slightly different from each other. And they talked to the cloud, and we're building some stuff, getting some dashboards, and then trying to find our first customers. So I got a really early on that one, and Levno's certainly grown and gone a lot of places.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Good job on that one. What was it like? So you probably worked at established organizations prior to this. What was it like going into like a pretty much, would you say it's a startup, like kind of
absolutely. It was a startup. Yeah. I guess I've never really worked in a big organization. Like, even the vet association, there's only like 20 people there, and they were doing everything from running events to courses to insurance schemes to, help desk for vets to, all sorts of different things. And so I was always a team of one or two, really. So moving to another place where I was a team of one or two was kind of no different, because still felt the same. It wasn't until kind of later that I realised that actually big organisations are quite different.
Okay.
And I probably still haven't worked in a big organisation.
But
I'd like to try that one day.
Who did you learn off in? Like, how would you? Because it sounds like you're very confident. Like, did you just know what to do, or like, how'd you? Did you have someone senior or like a mentor to kind of guide you those early years, or?
No, not really. It was like, here's the next problem to solve, and then you work on solving it, and then here's the next problem to solve, and you work on solving it, and you just keep following your nose. I made lots of mistakes along the way, I'm sure. You always get to these places where you've got to make a technical decision. Do I go this way or do I go that way? Some of those are right, some of those are wrong. Ended up picking up Node.js, which is quite a big thing these days. And I was looking back at some of the initial commits, and I was using Node 0.012.
Oh wow!
Which was no one had heard of Node at that point. We decided we needed some UDP sockets, and we're using PHP, which couldn't do them.
Yeah.
And so we tried Node, and Node worked out quite well.
Was it Levno?
That was at Levno. Yeah.
Okay. And so you're employee number one. You're basically the first technical hire, I guess. So you were just they gave you a problem, you have to solve it.
Yeah. So I built this first prototype by using drag and drop interface, and like, well, this won't scale. It's good to experiment and try things. So first thing was to kind of basically rebuild that using proper code that you can then modify and tweak as needed. And then as we kind of started talking to customers, well, I didn't do the talking. We had business people that like to do that sort of thing. They would sort of come back with like, oh, so-and-so wants to do X. And so I'd go, don't know what I'm doing now. Let's make X. And so we'd add that feature in, and we sort of added features, and then as we got more customers, we worked out kind of what features people used and what they didn't use. And so the product got sort of trimmed and refined as we went through that process. Different levels of error reporting and bugs and all the things that come when you're starting to get a bigger system that you actually like, oh, we need to be able to track this stuff. So
log it, I guess.
Just log it. Add analytics in, what are the common problems? How do we know that? How are we going to work to solve those? All those sorts of things. So lots of interesting challenges.
Yeah, I'm guilty of. I had Michael on a podcast, but we kind of talked about the higher level of what it was like to be at Livno. In terms of, so Livno stands for level notifications, right? That's kind of like So when you talk about sensors, what type of sensors were they? Were they sensors just to determine like the volume of a petrol tank or of a fuel tank, or what was like the
use case? So the initial brief was to measure diesel tanks and then petrol after that. So it was a probe. Which screws on top of the tank with a wire with a pole that goes down into the tank, and using that pole you can then measure the level of the liquid using some clever electronics. Okay. And so we had many generations of that. So that was the sensor piece, which then had to talk to what we called a transceiver, which was a separate box that had all the solar and cellular stuff in it. Part of the challenge with that is diesel's okay, but petrol's explosive, and so you can't have electronics near petrol unless it is safe, and so there's a whole lot of safety stuff that you have to go through and testing to make sure that that product is suitable for use on a fuel tank.
Okay, it's a lot of like safety to jump through. Okay, this might be an ignorant question. How does a car determine how much petrol you have compared to what Livno can do?
So Livno was on sort of farm fuel tanks. That was their thing that they were interested in. So the founder of that had come out of the fuel distribution business. So they had drive tankers around to farms, fill up the farmer's fuel tank and charge them for the amount of fuel that they've put in there. Yeah. And he always knew that because you got no idea what's in the farmer's fuel tank. So you're just driving your truck around basically hoping you haven't run the customer out of fuel, or that they've used enough fuel that you can justify sending this truck to their property to fill it up again. So he always knew that there was value in knowing that information, which is where Livno started. From there, people were like, oh, can you measure this? Can you measure this? Can you measure this? And so we went down a number of different avenues, trying to not get too distracted, which was actually really, really difficult, because it turns out remote sensing is actually really hard. The real world is fuzzy and doesn't conform to nice clean rules, and people have got different behaviours on how they do things, and you've got to sort of cope with all of that in the sensor and in the back end. So we learned an awful lot of that sort of stuff, and then we started to transition into the next serious product, which was milk monitoring systems. So there were some new regulations coming in that required farmers to be able to monitor the temperature of the milk, because they milk the cows, it goes in a vat, sits there for a day or so, gets picked up by a milk tanker and taken off to the factory. And while it's sitting in the vat, it has to be kept cool. Yeah. And so knowing that your cooling system is working and that your milk isn't spoiling is really important to the farmers, because if it goes wrong, it's an incredibly expensive thing to have happen.
And wasteful.
You're talking, tens of thousands of dollars per incident type stuff. So we were trying to work out how to do this, and so we had temperature sensors around the coolers and in the vat, and a distance sensor in the vat, so we could measure the level. And you're dealing with all the different changes in season. When you've got, cows get milk once a day, they get milk twice a day. There's a small amount of milk, and it's increasing and it's decreasing, and it's really foamy, and all sorts of different challenges. With that, and trying to get that accurate, trying to detect when a milking starts and stops by looking at temperatures and volumes, which is actually harder than you think, because like the bottom of the vat is sloped. So when it isn't until you get a certain volume that you can measure that, and you can look at temperature differences. But in winter, the temperature differences go that way, and in summer they go that way, and at some time in the middle of the year they don't change. And so it's like, well, now how do we detect anything? There's no differential to look at. So all sorts of fun challenges there. They've since refined that system quite a lot and taken out lots of those sensors because they've found better ways of doing things.
Of course, yeah.
But again, it was a big discovery process. It's like, we don't know. We just need to try and see.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of cool being on the frontier, would you say? Because like a lot of people get told what to do. I know certainly for me, I struggle to have that ability to just solve the problem. Like if I can't solve the problem, I can't do it. But you have the ability to kind of research and like kind of go beyond, would you say? Or correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron.
Yeah,
I think it's a really cool skill to have.
To me, that's the only type of problem that there is the type that you just have to work out how to solve because it hasn't been done before. I've spent all my programming life doing that. So it's nothing new. Being told what to do and how to solve it, I can do it, but it only gets me interested for a certain length of time.
Fair enough. Did you ever have to, like, when you're working at Libno, make hires or kind of bring up junior developers, or is that not really way to do?
Yeah, no. I had a team of I think about 5 or 6. I can't remember now. It varied quite a lot depending on what sort of stage the company was going through.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was fun. Technical guy, problem solver, code, people. People are quite different to have to deal with. And, when you're a developer of one, you can just commit. It's fine.
Commit to main, yeah.
Commit to main. You do your own tests. No one else is there to test anything. And you push it to production. And then just book the next day to do hot fixes when people find stuff.
Yeah.
When you start to grow, that mode of operation doesn't work anymore. You need to be a lot more structured, and when you've got a team. And so, we hired, it was pretty much only new grads, was kind of I wouldn't say company policy, but it's what we did. And so I had no formal programming experience, no managerial experience, trying to teach and upskill these young guys into doing this. And that's when I, started to realize that not everyone thinks like me.
Yeah.
We're people that just love to, write code, tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'm like, what do you mean you can't do this bit of calculus or solve this problem? You're a programmer. So isn't that what programmers do? So lots of learning there. I wouldn't say I was probably the best manager in the world. I got pulled into all the different parts of the company. I was stretched really thin across the whole, the whole company. I sort of knew what was going on at every level inside the software we'd written. So not only did it do the reporting of stuff, we put together the data, report it to the customer, but we also had our CRM system built in there, all the cellular management, all of our workflow for the technicians who were going out. So it was a big project that had everything in it, which was really cool from a staff perspective because everything was just on tap. But it meant that there was a big demand on us developers to then try to keep up with everyone's demands because everyone wanted their system improved.
Okay.
So that was my introduction to a bigger, because we start off as one, and by the time I left, I think they were like 50 or something. So we'd grown quite rapidly, and so you're moving from a small company to a big company, but still very much in startup mode, and very much every day was learning something new, whether it's how to do something with a sensor or how to be a better manager.
Interesting. Yeah, lots of different hats. That's quite interesting when you talked about like developer of one. I mean, you probably have your own code style, like you can just push to the main and then fix the bugs as they come in like a waterfall.
Yeah, coding standards. Didn't need that. That's how I code,
So yeah, when you had those initial hires or kind of when you had to work multidisciplinary like, with different teams, like stakeholders, for example, did you have like a business methodology? Like, did you have a Scrum, or did you just meet up with them? What do you need? Work on a problem for X number of time, and then this is the product.
Initially we weren't we were a little bit structured. So we had an issue tracking system. I think it was called Redmine, which was actually a Ruby-based system, which was basically just an issue tracker. And so, I'd get things from all the different staff. They'd, can we go talk to Aaron? And so I'd convert it into technical speak that the rest of us could understand. and pop it in the issue tracker and pop it in the issue tracker, and you could allocate a version number to that. And so I would say, well, these ones are going in this version, these ones are going in this version. And that's kind of how we developed. It's like, okay, do you want to pick off these ones? You're kind of specializing in that area. Do you want to pick off these ones? And so we would just develop, and we'd have, I think, a branch for that version, and kind of everything would just go into that branch.
And using Git as well at that time?
Code QA, which wasn't a good idea because I was stretched too thin, and I really didn't have enough time to do the code QA. And so it wasn't unusual that version 14 was finished before version 12 was finished, because I'd spent more time doing code reviews on the later versions than the earlier stuff. So eventually we had a number of manager changes and team changes, and we ended up putting in a proper Scrum Agile process with all the religious ceremonies that go around that.
Meetings, yeah. I don't know, it could be necessary evil. I enjoy like how we do, like for where I work, I enjoy like that process of like 2 weekly sprints, iteration, and then like having a review and then allocating jobs. I enjoy it. So it's not for everyone. But
it worked. I mean, I think both systems kind of worked. I think the latter system gave the team a lot more visibility into what was happening rather than everything filtering through me, which ultimately was a good idea.
Yeah, it definitely can. Yeah, you definitely can overdo it. And so, were you guys using? I was just asked. Sorry, did you guys use Git at the time? Was it Git, or there's SVM back in the day? But
no, it was Git. Yeah, Git was kind of growing up enough that was kind of the choice that people were starting to go with. So we went with that. I was using, as I said, part of the Drupal community for a while, and they used CVS, I think.
Oh, CVS, yeah, okay.
Yep. And they then, I think they were thinking about moving from CVS to SVN, but then Git was coming along, so they just jumped from CVS straight through SVN to Git, and then everyone had to learn how to do this new Git thing, which was a very different workflow to the central CVS system that we'd all got frustrated with. But if you make a mistake, I need to ask for help from someone who's a volunteer, some other part of the world, and they'll get back to you when they're next looking at stuff. So being able to actually manage your own repos was good.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of you were at Livno for X number of years. Yeah, so what did you do after that? Like, we're kind of like going through your story.
So I ended up leaving Livno and Beta Solutions, which is another local company. It's the company that actually did the electronics that got me to subcontract in the first place. They were actually friends of mine from uni who started that, and they said, "Hey, do you want to come work for us?" And so I'm like, okay. And so they had a 3-month project that they wanted to do around improving their system. So I went to work there on a temporary 3-month contract doing systems improvement and trying to work out how to do projects more efficiently and report better and look at different ways of doing things. So I was there for 3 years on that 3-month contract. We kind of never got around to renewing that, and my role shifted more from doing that project, which kind of come to a natural end, and then kind of into doing kind of the software piece of the electronics. So they do like the mechanical design, then the sort of the circuit board electronics design, and then the firmware, which is the software that goes on the electronics. And then usually there's a software piece, whether that's kind of IoT, needing to talk to a cloud, whether that's kind of a test suite that goes around it, so that when you're in the factory, the boards can actually run, you connect them up to a computer which runs a whole lot of tests on it to make sure that it does the right thing. And there's a number of other sort of reasons why you want to connect electronics up to a computer. So I spent quite a while learning that space. I had a kind of a passing interest in electronics when I was younger, but I never kind of pursued that too much. So it was a bit of a deep learning curve getting into that. I know enough electronics to, I wouldn't say be dangerous, because I think I still need to know a bit more to actually build anything, but I can read a schematic and read a circuit board now and probably tell you what it does.
Wow, okay. And like what sort of languages were you using? Was it just C, assembly language? What kind of?
So for the embedded firmware, that's all in C. which isn't something that I needed to touch. They had engineers who specialised in that. I looked at C a few times and went, I'm not. This isn't me. I'm not going to do good at this. So I was mostly working with Python. So they decided at the time that Python's going to be the kind of standard language for writing the software piece. So we started on, I think Python 2.7 was kind of just reaching the end of life, and so we're starting on the Python 3.5 or whatever it was when they made that cut over. And starting to build things from there. So I think the first thing I had to build was a bit of calibration software and using Matplotlib and Tkinter for the user interface, which is a little long in the tooth these days.
Nice. Okay, and then basically the electronics portion, was it kind of like knowledge you had from Levno, or you just had to learn that from scratch?
I kind of picked up bits. Some stuff I learned from Levno, but I needed to get a lot deeper in it. So a lot of binary communication. So you see these screens, people see, zeros and ones flowing down the screen. And we were actually doing that sometimes. We're trying to debug something, and it's like we're literally printing out what's coming out on the bus in hex, and you're scanning the hex looking for particular sequences, going, oh, hang on, what's going on there?
That's incredible. Okay.
Which isn't the most efficient way to do debugging, but, when stuff isn't working and you have to go to the low levels, you need to do that. So, I just use high-level languages, JavaScript and BASIC, and, you've got the concept of a number, but, you've got an unsigned int and a signed int and an unsigned int 16 and a long and a float and a double, and all of these types really start to matter, and how you actually do the math and things around that. So
precision as well. Yeah, precision would be like
deeper and all of that sort of stuff, and really getting down to that low level. So we mostly used UART as the communication, which is a sort of it's a text-based protocol, but you can send binary over it just fine. And so we're usually just sending a binary packet structure that we'd developed in-house with some redundancy checks and standard packet formats and things. So ended up building a fair bit of tooling around that. So initially we're reading the hex and like, we can do better than this. So write a script system that sits around that, where you can then write that packet type as a definition. And then you can new packet, here's the data, and you can just call toString and it prints it out in a human readable form, which makes life so much easier.
Have you heard of Advent of Code?
No.
Okay. So every like for Christmas time, there's a tradition where
yes, I have actually. Yes,
Advent of Code. And I think one of the problems involved, like it wasn't anything to do with the problem, but it's kind of like front matter to explain what the problem was, and it talked about when you send like a packet or information, like the first bytes are there to check like what type it is, or type, or like to verify if the packet was correct. So that stuff kind of blew my mind. Like how much there's so much abstracted away. It's really, really important. Like even a string is really complicated, or like you said, even with different number types. At work, we have a problem with like our database stores numbers in different formats. So we've got numeric with Postgres, numeric. I think it's double precision, and like obviously double precision is not very precise. Like it's not precise numbers. So when we go to like very, very high number of decimal places, like the numbers don't work out. So that's stuff that is really important to know, like you said. So so are we up to present day yet, or are we still going on your journey? So you have Better Solutions. What's
so Better Solutions. So I was there until about a year and a half ago. And ended up leaving there. So now I am so right now I'm working for myself. So I've set myself up as doing sort of software consultancy, though I do a number of other things. But before I go there's a little kind of intermediate piece where I was at Better Solutions, and me and one of the other guys there, we were trying to develop some high-tech radar sensors. So we started a little company. So we're both working in other jobs, doing projects for other people, and at the same time trying to start our own company, doing some R&D on some of the new millimeter wave radar sensors. And so we've developed those. So that's the little product that we made.
Nice. On screen. Cool.
on screen there. Just happened to have one sitting there at my desk. So we worked away at that for a number of years, and it's a very difficult thing to do. We've discovered radar, both from a technical perspective. There's so much going on in terms of all the radio stuff, and then all the layers of math that you have to do to get data out of that, and then the work you then have to do on that data to get anything useful that you can then work with. But at the same time, from a regulatory perspective, it's very difficult because you're literally spraying radio emissions out into the environment. And so the regulators care about you doing that. And so there are rules around that. And being a new technology, the rules were new. And so we had to get our product certified for the US and for Europe. Okay. So we have to send our product to the US because there were no testing labs any closer who actually had the gear that could test it.
Okay.
So we got certified for Europe, tick, no problem.
Nice.
US, did all the tests, passed all the technical stuff, submitted to the authority, and they said, so how are you going to make sure this is in a fixed location, which is part of the rules? And we're like, we're not, because we want the part of the rules where it's mobile. It says, or short-range disturbance sensing. I'm like, that's what we're doing. They go, oh, no, short range is like short range. Like, the rules didn't say how short was.
Okay, given very ambiguous.
Given a technology, this particular technology, you can go out 100 meters or so. Other radars, you can go out kilometers or even tens of kilometers or hundreds of kilometers. Is 1 meter, and if 1 meter is short, what it's 10 meters? Is 10 meters short or medium or long? It's certainly not long. And there's no talk of what medium was, so we're like, what must be short? It turns out regulators meant 1 meter for that. And so we had lots of sort of toing and froing on that. And at the same time, the regulators have decided that they would rewrite the rules now that the products have been out in the market a little while and people understand them better. And there's a lot of interesting things people want to do with these, and they've been at that for about 3 years. Still waiting for them.
That's interesting, yeah. So, okay, regulation is very difficult.
Which means we can't legally sell our product into the US, which is about where we're expecting about half our market to be. Which, that's hard.
Can't do much about it. Do you think a lot of the regulation is just... Yeah, sorry, you go, Aaron.
Sorry, we'll stay regulation for a bit. So what was your question?
I was going to ask about, do you think regulations are more about who you know, if you know the people who actually do the regulating?
No, it's usually the people that sign off on it, the hard-nosed technical people. It's like, here are the rules, here are all the tests. I want to sign off on every I and every T. It needs to do what it needs to do. You're getting stuff through isn't really about. It's when who you know is important comes into its own. Is when you need to understand in a bit more detail what the rules mean. Or how they were intended to be interpreted. It's when knowing somebody who's kind of been involved at that level is helpful.
Yeah, I'd agree. What's the biggest challenges you faced, like going out on your own? I could say would you say you're kind of going out on your own, or?
Yeah, I am now. So I've initially was just contracting back to Beta Solutions to do finish off some of the projects I was working on. But as it's transpired, projects sort of keep coming, and it's kept me pretty busy between that and radar. So that's kept me busy for sort of the first while. We've since decided that we're going to sort of put radar aside. The market's actually really difficult as well. The kind of the applications we were going after, the technology wasn't quite up to where it needed to be. And then the people who were after those sort of solutions, they were startups themselves. So I needed to sell, 300 units a month, and you talk to a startup who wanted their handheld and, lots of toing and froing with emails and, we might buy 3 this year. It's like, that doesn't scale, that doesn't work. We looked at a few other options, but in the end we decided that we were just going to put that aside for now, and focus on things that we can actually make headway on.
Fair enough. In terms of, so you've been in Palmerston North for like quite a while.
Yep.
What's technology in the Manawatu landscape for you? Like, do you think it's something that's growing? What is Palmerston North technology? Is it just agri-tech? What are your
Oh,
thoughts?
Palmies and the Manawatu is a fantastic place to do
Yeah,
technology. I've been, as you heard from my story, been involved with it quite a bit.
yeah,
But
so many
that's
things.
kind of my work story. There's kind of a parallel story that runs along that,
Yeah,
where I've been been an advocate for Manawatu as a technology hub, and
yeah,
getting more things happening here. So that initially started with IT professionals, which is a national certifying body for IT. So I was the inaugural chair, bringing that to Palmerston North. So we've got the branch set
nice.
up here. So that kind of, if nothing else, gets us on the map of like, here's all the regions where we've got tech branches in Palmerston North in that list. So that gives us a little bit of kudos even from that part. And from there, we started to try to run some events and things. Turned out to not really be the vehicle we thought it was, to make the difference that we wanted. And a number of businesses in town had wanted to get something, collaborative going in that space for a number of years. Had been a number of attempts at kind of getting the wheels going, but everybody's busy running their businesses.
Yeah,
It's done in volunteer time, and that always just gets put at the bottom of the pile, and nothing really had ever happened. So we're like, right, ITP is not doing what we need. There's let's make something happen. So a few of us kind of got together through a few meetings. I'd done some work with a guy called Richard from Firecrest,
yeah,
and then also the IT breakfast that we had started at the time. Met up there with a number of people. I'm like, right, let's do it. So got a group together. Ran an online meeting with half a dozen companies. Who's
yeah,
in? Got a yes from everyone. Steve, who's current EO of Manawatu, he said, I'm actually really keen on this area as well. I said, well, would you like to be hired? So we worked out that, okay, we want to make this thing go. We need some dedicated time. So we set up a organisation and we hired Steve, and Manawatu was born. So, that's the story of kind of how Manawatu started, but I guess it also sort of explains, my passion for tech in the region and for wanting to make that grow, and to let people know that we're as good a place as any to be doing technology in New Zealand or in the world.
that's
And there's a whole
awesome.
lot of benefits to doing it in the regions compared to the big cities in Auckland. It's you hear of people that spend an hour and a half getting to work through the traffic. It's like, oh, it took me 2 minutes on my bike.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
the lifestyle is much better, and you can build tech from anywhere in the world. New Zealand's already in the far reaches of the the backwaters of where the main markets are. So doing it in the regions makes a lot of difference in that regard. And I think Pami and the Manawatu can continue to do a lot more, as we continue to grow and have new businesses start and businesses come to the region. There's actually a lot of tech happening here that we never knew about. Wasn't until we sort of started digging. I started in the ITP days. I'm like, well, who do we need to talk to about becoming a member?
Yeah.
Starting to do the Google search, making the spreadsheet. It's like, oh, there's quite a lot here. And then through Manawatu, Steve and all his connections, that list is growing longer and longer and longer, as we just discover more things that are just happening under the surface. Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
businesses that aren't customer facing. So, business to business services that, make a product that sells to another business, probably in another country.
Yeah.
They don't need a public presence in Palmerston North
Yeah.
because no customers here. So there's quite a lot of that going on. So it's a great place.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great. And I think Manawatu is really just amazing. It's kind of cool having those monthly meetups.
Yep.
Last Thursday of the month, usually they've been so useful because if it wasn't for those, I'll just
For the
be
software,
by myself. The
software
software
meetup.
devs, yeah, software devs,
Yeah.
yeah, which I go
I
to
have done that for a
religiously.
couple of years as well. Forgot about that piece.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, it's really great having that because we've got a community, sense of community. So I guess like for if you're working in a company in Palmerston North, you're okay. You've got that sense of community. But if you're kind of going off on your own, for example, or if you work remotely for a team overseas, you kind of get isolated. So I think it's great having that. It's great knowing the people who are in that problem space as well, which is really great. So yeah, great work, Aaron, like setting all this up basically. And I think it just takes a group of people who are really, really passionate about it to get something started, right? You know, a lot of people think, oh, someone else is going to do it, but yeah, it's great that it's all been set up. Do you have any advice?
As long as someone else can keep sustaining it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where you got to get the young ones in. Do you? Speaking of young people, do you have any advice for like your younger self, or things you might have done differently, or things you didn't know now that you would have helped you? That you would have helped you back then if you'd known sooner?
I think the way I got into programming, I think is pretty good. Having to just learn from the get-go that it's all about problem solving, and to just always follow your nose and take that one step ahead. So that part, no, I definitely wouldn't change that at all. Yeah. So if you're getting into tech, it's definitely really, I guess, important to understand you and what your passions are, and what you're good at and what you're not good at. I've talked to a number of particularly senior developers over the years who have ended up in management, and they've decided that actually managing people and managing systems and things, I get that, but I like creating and making stuff. And a lot have actually gone back from that management role to more that creative side, where your passions are and you've got skills, because writing code is very different to being good at managing people. And some of those things are best left to the people that are good at doing those things.
Exactly. Cool.
But yeah, from a younger person's perspective, build stuff. Just doesn't really matter what it is. If it's a little ASCII car game with flashes and or whatever, so a text-based adventure game or whatever. It doesn't have to be a flash thing. Although there's a lot of tools out there now that mean you can write pretty cool apps, with drag and drop and little bits of code. Just you get familiar with building stuff.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Yeah, I'm such a big proponent of just make something. It doesn't have to be the next Facebook, something small. Even if you don't even finish it, you still learn from the building process, and like you follow your curiosity. Yeah. There's a reason kids learn things really fast, because they're having fun, and that's kind of like how programming should be. Coming to the tail end of the podcast, did you want to add on anything?
I don't think so, other than to say thank you for having me on here, and thank you for what you're doing. It's been great fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, Aaron. But before we go, I usually ask most people on the podcast this: what's your favorite thing on your desk? I know you showed us the radar. What's your favorite thing on your desk at the moment?
On my desk.
Or interesting item.
Interesting item would be a radar corner reflector.
Well, okay. Is it a prism, or I guess like it works like a prism, right?
Yeah. It's actually gold plated.
Gold plated. Wow.
It's a triangular thing, and so you see the radar waves, and they come and they collect on here, and it focuses it back kind of as a beam, which means that this appears to be quite a big surface to a radar.
Oh, interesting.
When you're testing, and you need a very specific point rather than trying to detect a vague area. These things are really valuable.
Cool. I know this is probably the longest podcast I've ever done, but if people want to get in touch with you, Aaron, how would they get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can get in touch with me there. Email address is aaron@webtolife.software, which is my consulting business at the moment. And I have a website, which is aaronfulton.kiwi. So
perfect.
One of those three things.
Awesome. I'll make sure that they're in the show notes. Thanks for coming on, Aaron. I guess we've got to do this another time, have another episode. Thank you so much.
Nice. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Manawa Tech podcast. Please let me know what you think about this episode in the comments below. It was a longer one, so I'm interested to hear what you guys think about longer episodes. But as always, catch you in the next episode.